You're listening to the Today in Manufacturing podcast.
Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to a new episode of the Today in Manufacturing podcast. With me this week is Jeff Ranke and Andy Zoll. We each have about 15 years of experience covering the manufacturing industry. Every week, we take the 5 most popular stories on our website and discuss the implications they might have on the industry going forward. No Anna again this week. Hope the family gets well, and we hope to see her again soon. How you guys doing this week?
Good, David. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm going to finish the rest of the intro now.
All right.
Please make sure to like, share, subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving us a positive review on whatever platform you use. Finally, to email the podcast, you can reach any of us at Jeff, Andy, or David at IEN.com with email the podcast in the subject line. Jeff, now how you doing?
Great. Really good.
All right.
Glad to hear the rest of that intro. Also excited because we had some responses to the trivia question. So at the end of this episode, we'll give out the answer as well as pose the next question.
Oh, right on. Okay. Before we jump into it, I also want to do a special shout out to Alex for reaching out to us, not to be confused with producer Alex, but the person who reached out about The Man Who Saved Christmas. You started watching that, right, Jeff?
Yeah, halfway through it, pretty solid. Part of it is it's kind of cool because it's a true story, and it's about the guy who created the erector set.
Oh.
And some things that his story from there. So yeah, so far, very entertaining.
I can already feel my hands bleeding with the tiny little cuts. Like from when I found my dad's erector set in my grandma's basement. I'm just like, this is dangerous. A lot of fun though.
Yeah.
I also wanted to put out a programming note that we will be back on Tuesday, January 4th. I know that most people download this on Monday, so I apologize for whoever's commute I'm ruining on the Monday, but hopefully you can catch up with us on Tuesday. All right, let's jump into our first story this week. Lazy millennials, not the main cause of labor shortage. It turns out that early retirement has a more significant impact on the labor shortage than millennials. In November 2021, 3.6 million more Americans left the labor force and declared that they did not want a job compared to the same month in 2019. About 90% of them were 55 or older. The departures have been attributed to a number of issues, including the stock market and growing home prices, giving older workers more options. It can also be linked to the higher risk for older people to go to work during the pandemic. It's important to note that the unretirement rate has increased from 2% early in the pandemic to 2.6% in recent months. Now, unretirement are obviously people that are coming out of retirement and back into the workforce. Andy, what were your thoughts on this story and lazy millennials?
I always like a story where popular perception kind of crashes into actual data.
Yeah.
Because it always kind of reinforces how bad our instincts are sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
No, I found this story very, very interesting because now overgeneralizing broad swaths of the population is bad and wrong pretty much all the time, not to mention inaccurate. But we're technically both millennials, so that one kind of frosts me a little bit about how they're lazy and whatever. No, it's we've heard a lot of talk about the Great Resignation as in this, kind of rapid shift in the labor market. And that seems to be that the younger workers they're leaving jobs, but they're heading to different jobs. It's not this perception that they're on the government dole, so they're just sitting around watching Netflix. That's not what's happening. They're taking different jobs because workers are in demand. And then it's older workers who are kind of surveying the economics and the maybe more unsafe conditions for them with COVID and saying, no, it might be the time to cash out a little bit. So, no, I thought it was interesting, and it's always good to get your preconceived notions checked a little bit.
True. And I mean, we are millennials, and I haven't been a lazy millennial since my early 20s, like in college when I had like 30 different jobs, but that's for a different time. All right, Jeff.
Well, point of clarification, Andy. First of all, it didn't say that millennials are not lazy. It just said they weren't at fault for this.
Oh.
So that can still be debated. Seems how I'm not part of that group. We can throw that out there. No, I think it was interesting, the title that we chose when we ran this. CNN had a similar report where they talked about boomers are to blame for the labor shortage. I thought it was interesting that there's just this need to sort of centralize it on one group or something. You know,
blame and
it seems
attack.
like really trying to be divisive here. And the reality is, I don't think this is an age thing or a generation thing. I think this is just the result of a number of factors that came from a worldwide pandemic. I mean, weird times created a weird situation. You've got a combination of people who, in my opinion, if you've worked for 30 years and you're good financially and you want to cash out, that doesn't put you at fault for anything.
True. Yeah.
Same thing, if you're in a situation where you want to hold out for a better gig, you're also not at fault. It isn't anybody's to blame. It's just a bunch of weird dynamics. I think the one that I do struggle with a little bit is this sort of anti-work movement that we've talked about, where people are basically saying, you know what, I am totally cool just crashing with 6 people in a studio apartment and we'll figure it out until we can find exactly what we're looking for. That's fine. But we also ran an article last week talking about the Port of LA getting more stuff coming in all the time because we're still buying and wanting more stuff. So when we look at this, as painful as it is for a lot of service industries, for a lot of manufacturers, I think this whole labor shortage is something that will work itself out. I think human nature is going to eventually say, you know what, I am 35, 40 years old. I want a nice winter coat and maybe a little space. So as that comes about, you're going to find a job. You're going to want to have some economic means to make those things happen. So I just think this pandemic put everybody in a really weird spot, had them re-examine a number of things. And this is what you're seeing right now is sort of this societal push. And it's just gained so much traction. More people have jumped onto it because of their personal experiences. So I don't think it's boomers, millennials, Gen X, Gen Z, whatever else we got going on out there. I think it's just a weird time right now in society.
No, I agree with it being a weird time and it being a symptom of the weird time. I'm not sure that I agree with the basic plot of the pilot to New Girl that you pictured in terms of all these barely employed millennials just crashing with each other and hanging out. But I do agree that, and we've talked about it before, that the pandemic, I think, changed people's perspectives. Yeah. It changed what people were willing to work for. It changed what people were willing to do. Like, and part of that was already starting with the gig economy. You know, people were breaking off from traditional roles and trying to do it themselves, even though from the people I know working in the gig economy, they're working about 5 times harder than people with a regular gig. What I found interesting was that we did see this increase of only 0.6% of people that are coming back out of retirement, but that still works out to like 21,600 more workers unretiring on like a monthly basis. I also wanted to talk about how companies are making it more and more attractive to keep working, because I think that some companies are fed up with this labor market now and are actually finding more success in keeping current staff happy and older staff incentivized. Whether or not it's convincing people to push off their retirement a little bit, offering maybe a scaled back workload, because I mean, we know how difficult it is to have that, or how valuable that tribal knowledge is in this industry. And I mean, if you have a guy working 30 hours, 25 hours a week with that tribal knowledge, he might be better for your company than a full-time person that you got to train up. I don't know.
Yeah.
At least in the interim.
I think a lot of the things that have come about too in terms of wage increases for several positions is a very positive thing. Oh yeah. You hope that doesn't have an overly negative effect in sort of feeding this inflation beast that we're also fighting right now. Yeah. But there has been some things that have come to light that I think will help self-correct as well.
Yeah, and with this great resignation that we're talking about, I wanted to say that it also depends a lot on the study. You know, this is one particular data set from CNN. If you go to another source, you know, in October, there was another study that said millennials, Gen Z, and the worst thing I've ever heard of, zillennials, were remaining out of the workforce. So what I like about the zillennial is that, you know, I don't like getting lumped in with this millennial, because we're at the top end of the millennial. But when they kind of break off the bottom of the zillennials, then I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll ride with the rest of them.
So what's the one before millennials? What's that generation?
I think it's technically, that's Gen X.
That's Gen X? I'm Gen X. That's what I am? Okay.
Yeah. So I guess we're like maybe millennials. No.
Yeah.
But so this separate report that came out in September said that nearly a quarter of workers aged 20 to 34 were not considered part of the U.S. workforce. And that's 14 million Americans, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, that were neither working nor looking for work. And that's, man, if we could just get some of them incentivized to get back, it would do a host of good.
Yeah.
All right. Our next most popular story this week. EV startup Nikola settles with U.S. for $125 million. Troubled electric and hydrogen truck startup Nikola got a little closure when it agreed to a $125 million settlement for defrauding investors. In July, company founder Trevor Milton was charged with 2 counts of securities fraud and wire fraud. The SEC said Milton misled investors about Nikola's technological advancements, like in-house production capabilities, hydrogen production, truck reservations and orders, and its financial outlook. He also lied about its capabilities, like refueling time on the prototype vehicles. Based in Phoenix, the company didn't admit or deny the SEC's findings, but it did agree to cease and desist from future violations. Andy, at least they agreed to stop lying in the future.
This is the company that, in a video of its prototype, showed its engine working when it was just rolling down a hill. Is that what happened here?
Yeah, they did too, because that was them and Lordstown,
yes,
I believe.
Yes. So the main target here, it seems like from all corners, is Trevor Milton, the company's founder. This company is obviously settled this SEC investigation, but in their response, they're basically not admitting guilt, but they're also saying, hey, this is all his fault, and we're trying to get our money back that we're paying to the government. We're trying to get that back from him. So, and then he's also under investigation by the Justice Department. So that kind of seems to be who all the focus is on. Nikola, they have their own issues to hammer out as they try to move forward as an actual legitimate company here. So maybe if they focus all the regulatory and investigative energy on Milton, they can leave the company alone to try and scrap together a future somehow.
Well, it was like we were talking about with the DC Solar investigation finally wrapping up. Like, the company needs a patsy sometimes, and I feel like Milton is definitely that patsy.
I'm sure he had his role.
Yeah, I mean, he went on a global tour,
But he never should have been in this role.
Yeah,
and it was a big company. It's not like he was acting alone here. I mean,
yeah. Wow. Well, and we talk about, Jeff, to your point, we talk about when all of a sudden the startup becomes a multi-billion-dollar company. Maybe the guy at the helm shouldn't be there anymore.
There's a couple of things. First of all, I have to read this part of the story because the first part is the SEC said in its order that Milton embarked on a public relations campaign aimed at inflating and maintaining Nikola's stock price before the company had produced a vehicle. I got no problem with that. That sounds like every startup ever.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
But the SEC also found that Milton misled investors about Nikola's technological advancements, in-house production capabilities, hydrogen production, truck reservations and orders, and financial outlook. So basically everything else he lied about.
Yeah.
And what that indicates is he was obviously in over his head. Now, if you look at Trevor Milton's resume, if you will, he should not have been here because we've talked about this once or twice. Guys, it's still hard to build a car, and which would make it even twice as hard to build a semi-truck.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So this is not easy stuff. He has been involved in several startups that were sort of on the periphery of being related to this technology. So it can't be a huge shock that he made a lot of promises, fudged some numbers pretty seriously, and it backfired. Better management is what this company needs, because at the end of the day, we want this to work.
Yeah.
I'm not rooting against Trevor Milton or Nikola. I want it to work too. But the reality is this individual's actions took a company that was valued at about $8 to $9 billion a year ago and cut that in half.
Yeah.
Its stock price earlier this year was up over $23. It's down to like $9.
Yeah.
Using this SPAC approach, they had over $900 million in cash available to them. They've burned through a third of that already, and now they could lose another 25% due to this. After all of that, just prior to this, they delivered their first 2 trucks.
Yeah.
They sent them out to the name of the place here. Let me pull this up real quick. The Total Transportation Services, which is a truck company operating out of the LA and Long Beach ports. They've got 2 of these test vehicles in now. If they work, they're going to order 100 more of them.
Yeah.
There was also another contract that they just recently received from Hennef, which is a company, they primarily food and other liquid bulk products out of Oak Brook, Illinois, and they're ordering 10 trucks.
Yeah.
So again, everybody wants this to work, but when you've got a guy at the helm who probably is in way over his head, that puts a technology and really a new market at risk because he isn't well equipped to handle it.
Yeah.
And you called him a patsy. I don't think he's even a patsy. The reality is he just was the wrong guy for the job. It doesn't mean he doesn't have a place, a purpose, abilities. This was the wrong fit.
Oh yeah, no, he didn't start out a patsy. He started out a competent leader that grew the company. And then once everything, I feel like as he's rallying the troops with all these facts, there needed to be like, as he's making these claims about, refueling time, they needed somebody in the background just being like, forward-looking statement. And just like, all the other claims he was making, I just pictured the people in the back as he's giving these presentations going, oh, I don't know about that one. Can we say that? Okay, we're going to need to, something could have been done proactively rather than, but I feel like once the company kind of, things started rolling for the company, it's hard to kind of walk some of those statements back, when you're starting to get a little juice as a startup.
But you can, and that's why you want somebody in that role who understands we're going to come out strong and make all of these claims about what we're going to do. Not that we did it, not that we're doing it, but we're going to do it, we're going to do it, we're going to do it. Because when you start saying we already did it or it's in place, that's where you get in trouble.
Yeah.
And that's what happened.
And I could have read this wrong, but I think he's only 39. Like he's a young dude.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which just, again, we talk about this, but I mean, he's already been penalized for $125 million by 39. I'm just.
I mean, that could be the least of his troubles. I mean, this thing.
Oh, I know. The final thing I wanted to bring up was the company statements that I found interesting because, normal statement. The company will pay $125 million civil penalty in 5 installments over 2 years. It's fine. We got it. It'll be completely metered. Settlement resolves and concludes all government investigations of Nikola. Hey, they found a couple of bad apples. We got rid of them. Everything's tidy. They're not going to talk to us anymore. And then right at the bottom, the company has taken action to seek reimbursement from its founder, Trevor Milton, for costs and damages in connection with the government and regulatory investigations. That's where I got the whole patsy line. Because it was just like...
It was all him, man.
Yeah. You know what? We figured it out, and man, Trevor's going to pay. We're just going to start filling that golden parachute full of holes.
But he hasn't been fired yet, which is kind of mind-blowing.
Wait, he's still at the company?
He resigned.
He did resign.
He did.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Because he's founder and
that was
chair. Yeah.
That was right after the initial report came out, and I think he tried to hang on for a little bit, and then he was like, "No, you got to go."
Yeah.
Okay.
Step down from his board position. Yeah. All right. Our next most popular story this week. Half of the U.S. oil pipelines are reportedly unused. Energy research firm Woods Mackenzie recently said that about half of the oil pipelines in the United States are unused. Some of the nation's biggest networks are running at reduced capacity, including the Dakota Access, which was at 100% pre-pandemic and is now moving at about 77% of capacity. Pressures from OPEC, as well as investors who lost money during the shale boom, are encouraging U.S. producers to limit production. This is all happening as the world works to move beyond fossil fuel intensive technologies and industries. So, Jeff, will these empty pipelines live to see a ramp up of oil and gas, or are they going to stay dead and buried?
They will not stay dead and buried, David.
Okay.
I do not believe that to be the case. A couple of reasons. You're right. They put out the stuff in the Dakotas. Mm-hmm. It is starting to wind down, but there's also been a report out that they just found a new reserve potentially of oil to start extracting from there. Mm-hmm. We've also seen reports from the Energy Information Administration that says both the Marcellus Shale, which is kind of out in the Appalachia area, as well as the Permian Basin down in Texas, they're going to have record numbers in January in terms of production levels.
Okay.
They're going to need pipelines. So I do think that this was sort of a temporary setback in some respects. However, the capacity that is still out there and not being used is is alarming. Okay, mm-hmm. I would agree. That is kind of alarming to have that much infrastructure in place that is not being utilized. As you said, as we start transitioning to more sustainable solutions, more solar power, electric cars, all that kind of stuff, you do wonder about the future of having all these pipes in the ground. Yeah. What's kind of interesting is these pipes can be used for other things. Yeah. Okay. The main one that has a definite application is water delivery. Okay.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, I think there is opportunities to leverage this for other applications. I mean, worst case scenario, maybe we just get some pressure in there, start using it like pneumatic tubes, you know, like in an office building or at the bank or something. Just Amazon taps into it. We've got stuff shuttling underneath the earth and using these tubes for parcel delivery. What do you think?
I know they're not big enough, but I immediately thought like Boring Company Hyperloop sort of thing.
Yeah.
But, you know, for kids?
Pets.
Yeah, for pets.
Obviously kidding about the last
yeah.
one, but there is definitely application for these pipelines for other things. I guess.
That's good to know that they're not just, you know, taking up space in the ground.
Right.
Andy, I mean, part of this industry with oil and gas, it has to come, not everything's always going to be running at 100%.
No, and things seem to fluctuate a great deal within that industry. And, you know, I'm sure the stats at this particular juncture are subject to any number of factors, which were mentioned already, OPEC and the coming out of the pandemic and all that sorts of things. It does make me wonder, not that there's a huge appetite at the moment for additional big pipeline projects, but under a future administration or under a future Congress, if there were, it might be hard to make that sale given all the employment and environmental disruptions. If all these are sitting idle right now, you know, what's the argument to be made to build more of them?
Right.
So it's that's obviously hypothetical and far down the road, but that's just might be another element of that argument because it's always a big fight regardless.
Well, in oil and gas shippers, they often find themselves building these pipelines amid a boom, only to find out that they actually make too much capacity when that downturn happens. And I was interested to see that production surged to 13 million barrels per day in early 2020. And at the time, the U.S. was the top oil producer. Yeah. I was not familiar with that. And it has still averaged 11 million barrels per day in 2021, although it says like only 11 million barrels per day. But I'm like, still seems like a lot.
Well, we're still buying oil too. I mean, it's not like we're relying just on the stuff that we make. So it is an interesting dynamic that came about from primarily those three areas geologically that we were able to do. And I think that's a great point, Andy, that you make too. One of the reasons that I was definitely critical of President Biden when he first came into office was slashing the Keystone Pipeline and some other similar type of projects. But in light of this, it does make you think a little bit about that stuff. And are we just make the most use of what we already have? I mean, that just seems like common sense.
Yes, regardless of political motivation.
I wonder when the tipping point is. Like, obviously, the global leaders are talking more in theory about weaning off fossil fuels more than it's actually taking place in practice, at least right now. But I wonder when that tipping point is where some of these arguments where this infrastructure will be obsolete. I wonder where down the road that happens because it's coming at some point.
Well, and we've talked about it. And while it seems to kind of come and go in a regulatory discussion, it seems like it's the private sector that's been pushing the alternative agenda more so. You know, with big companies, big automakers setting near-term deadlines as to kind of when to get off of fossil fuels.
I think everybody, maybe the private sector now, maybe a little more than government in some areas, kind of sees the writing on the wall.
Which is number one good, because that's where it should come from. It should have a practical application, not just being forced upon people by government agendas, however you want to term them. I mean, there are helpful government agendas too. They're not all bogus, but that's where it does need to come from because companies need to be profitable at the same time as they are making all these other improvements. So
True.
It's good to hear.
All right. Our next most popular story this week. Poultry plant workers vote to remove union. 80% of poultry plant workers at Mountaire Farms in Delaware recently voted to remove the United Food and Commercial Workers Local 27 union. The union has been at the plant for 44 years, and Mountaire president Philip Plylar called the move, quote, a huge step forward, which I found shocking. This is the second time workers voted to remove the union, which represented some 1,000 workers. The company voted to oust the union last summer, but the results were thrown out by the NLRB due to a complaint by the union over the timing of the vote. Now, it remains unclear why employees made the decision. The reason the vote was ousted is also unclear. The they don't know why they haven't come out and said why they kicked out the union. Although it did sound like it was very politicized on both sides. And the Teamsters do still represent about 200 workers at the plant. Jeff, I thought this entire thing was interesting because we're seeing a kind of a real pro-union movement in this country, and it was interesting to see one get voted out.
Well, especially in this sector, we've seen stuff at Frito-Lay. We've seen stuff at just recently Kellogg's. We had a lot of meat processors, which these guys fall under that genre of work, where they were benefiting, the workers were benefiting from going on strikes. They were supported by their union and getting better working conditions, better wages. So this is interesting. Going back a little bit, we talked about they had a vote on this initially. And essentially what happened there, and this leads a little bit into my conspiracy theory that I'm going to throw out here in a little bit, but basically that vote, they didn't even count the votes. They threw them out because apparently you can't have a vote on the status of the union, whether it's to ratify it or get rid of it, within 3 years of accepting a collective bargaining agreement.
Yeah.
So apparently that vote violated that statute. I don't know if that's an NLRB law. I don't know if that's a union bylaw. I'm not sure. But that was what happened there. So they threw those out. But then this vote, which was initiated by an employee, passed like by a huge margin, right? I mean,
356 to 80.
You also take into effect that this is the only facility at within this company's collection of factories. They operate in 5 states, 10,000 employees, that has a union. So my my sort of like half glass, half empty perspective is almost, all right, these employees probably were looking to get some sort of improvements after seeing everything else that's going on. I'm sure they face some of the same pressures and situations as others did during the pandemic and working a lot. Saw an opportunity to increase their their wages and their whole pay package. It would not be surprising if someone at this company basically said, hey, we want to do this for you. Get this union out of here and we'll take care of you. Now, I know that would take a lot of trust, obviously, between the workers, and there's collusion and other issues there. But the United Food and Commercial Workers is the 5th largest union in the country. It has over 1.3 million members in the U.S. and Canada. This is not just a local thing here that they're dealing with. So for them to be removed from the facility and for them to be no real reasons why, just makes me look a little bit deeper and wonder if there wasn't more going on there between the factory and the workers.
Yeah, no, the chatter back and forth, you definitely heard about the people that were pro-union were talking about closed door meetings that they were having to talk about anti-union sentiment. And then they also had the pro-union collective that was, talking about, trying to sway people to keep the union. One thing that I was surprised with, Andy, is that, why did fewer than half of the members that the union represents vote?
I wish I could tell you, and I hope there's some follow-up on this story, because we're just kind of left to speculate wildly here because there aren't a lot of answers. This movement was started by, at least the latest effort was started by a single employee backed by what's called a right to work group, which is basically breaking closed shops in factories and that sort of thing. Beyond that, how management's tactics, the attitudes of the workers, kind of the whole stakes of this decision are just kind of left open-ended. So we don't really have a ton of answers about that. So hopefully those answers will be forthcoming. And I'm also curious about why not this particular factory, but this particular industry, because I don't think it's out of line to suggest that poultry plants, they're not necessarily known for having the best working conditions. That's a tough gig.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's unfair to suggest either that their workforce may come disproportionately from vulnerable populations. However you want to categorize that. So there's just a lot of unanswered questions and some uncomfortable questions about how this happened. So I hope we get some answers at some point.
Jeff, why do you think about 550 employees abstained? Did they just miss the mailing date?
I would say first thing that comes to my mind is they thought basically my vote is it's not going to matter. This is going to happen essentially. So I'm just not going to bother. It is kind of alarming though, when you're looking at basically more than half of the facility didn't vote. I'm almost surprised that counts as legit. When you have that many people missing.
Yeah.
there, and the other thing is this seems real, as Andy alluded to, kind of closed lip in terms of what's going on inside here. So there may have been some concerns about management pressures. Other people, there could have been some ringleaders that were also applying pressure internally. So we don't know. It will be interesting to see what else comes out. I also thought your comment about what was it the president of the company or the manager of the plant?
Oh yeah, the president of the company. Yeah,
his comment there,
a huge step forward.
Yeah. I understand not having to deal with a union probably does make your job easier. I do get that, but it's about the workers. This should have all been, hey, the workers have responded. We're going to do what they want and take care of them. This is what they chose.
Yeah.
That's what it should have been.
Echoing the same point, surprisingly little chatter on all social media, quoting and there are all kinds of media outlets covering this, and they couldn't get any employees. It was all union reps that were commenting, didn't get any employees talking about, with the Kellogg's deal, we had people giving specific examples of working conditions and how many hours they were working. And this was a union that was in place since 1977. So I just, it's kind of like, it's over, everyone quiet.
Well, the only other thing I could think of too is when you look at Delaware versus where some of their other facilities are located, Arkansas, for example, the average hourly pay is going to be different.
Yeah.
The standard of living is different.
True.
So there could have been some other insinuations, shall we say, made there towards the long-term viability of keeping that plant running.
True.
Yeah.
True. All right. Our top story this week. Former CEO charged with embezzling $15 million. Her name is Donna Asawit Steele, and she has been charged with embezzling more than $15 million from her employer. The former CEO used the money to pay for the typical things you buy with stolen cash, like trips and jewelry, but also family weddings. She even used the money to fund personal businesses run by her family. Steele is charged with 1 count of wire fraud, and her employer wasn't named in the court documents, but I figured it out. Prosecutors said it's a subsidiary of a foreign corporation and makes carbide products used in saw blades for the woodworking industry and also metalworking. So she spent $255,000 for stays at the Plaza Hotel in New York City, more than $500,000 on jewelry, more than $200,000 on this amazing wedding, must have been a real banger, and more than $100,000 on flowers. She also transferred more than $350,000 to clothing and furniture businesses that she operated, which was called Opulence by Steele. Andy, was it lost on you that the place she transferred it to called Steele?
This is why you need a trusted circle of confidants around you, so you can ask them, hey, should I name my sketchy furniture brand Opulence by Steele? And they can be like, no, maybe go a little more subtle.
Yeah.
No, this story appears to check most of the boxes for crazy things to buy with stolen cash. So this was a good one. This is one of those instances where, stupidity is not illegal, right? You just get penalized for things you do when you're stupid.
Yeah.
This is just a lazy and clumsy way to commit corporate theft, and kind of needs to pay the penalty just for being so brazen about it.
Instead of Opulence by Steele, Jeff, how about Glam by Embezzlement?
Well, are you going to share the name of the company that you're able to find?
Yeah, so according to the Hickory Daily Record, she worked at Tigra USA, which is a company that makes tungsten carbide and cutting materials for tools companies in Hickory, North Carolina. She was there from 1999 to 2020, January 2020. Now, one of the things, Jeff, that I also found interesting was when credit card companies would reach out to her about suspicious transactions, all she had to do was go, yeah, no, they're approved. So
yeah, this one, man. So, and it's not a small facility. It's a German-owned company. So this is a subsidiary, Tigra USA. Still 150, 200 people in this facility. And that's what got me, because looked at a report on the charlotteobserver.com about this story. And they said because of Steele's actions, prosecutors said that vendors withheld products from the company due to later non-payment. Customers complained about being placed on credit holds despite paying what they owed at the time. And even potentially the worst is employees weren't paid on time, had their insurance canceled without warning, and saw their company cards decline when they made legitimate purchases.
Oh.
So, I mean, it wasn't just her stealing. Mm-hmm. She hurt the people that were making those funds available to her, which is sickening. And it's such a head shaker. And you talk about, stupid things to do. She'd been doing this for 6 years. I mean, she became the CEO in 2015. What led me to do is just wonder, how does somebody get to this point? Because at some point in her life, she was obviously a superstar for this company. She must have been very successful and very good at what she was doing. She made this CEO. Yeah. What happened? So, and just trying to get into the mindset a little bit, and it's almost sociopathic. Like it's just not caring. So I was looking at an article talking about some of the common traits of embezzlers.
Interesting.
And first of all, and it fits in with the profile. First of all, they are very possessive of things. So you can think of people who potentially are very successful, take ownership of things, and it becomes theirs. So they become this mentality of, this isn't just the company's money. This is also mine. This is ours. This is what we've done. Okay. And we've created this, and taking charge of that means that she can also sort of limit who has access to all of that stuff, all of those financial dealings, all of those records, and she can insulate herself. And what that can lead to is this cognitive dissonance where even though they know embezzlement is wrong, what they're doing isn't. They convince themselves that because they've taken possession of this and it's their thing to manage and it's their hard work, that they're not stealing from the company. They're just leveraging the fruits of their labor, essentially. And they convince themselves of this. And that's one thing. But again, when you look at the 150 people that she was screwing over in this plant as well with these actions, it's something I'm glad I have a hard time wrapping my mind around.
Yeah. Well, and we've talked about it with other embezzlement cases and other people that get caught with fraud, where I just see it as, the first time that she used the company card on clothing and nothing happened. Yeah. Or the first $50,000 she spent on flowers and got away with it. The one thing that I was surprised was also missing was cars. Normally, you got quite a garage going on, cars and a couple homes. But I completely agree. It's like almost a part of the character trait that makes them driven to become a CEO.
Yeah, and I should point out that it's not necessarily business savvy or what have you that gets you to that top chair sometimes. Sometimes it's just convincing people around you that you deserve it and you earned it. So I don't want to name any names in particular here, and that's not.
No,
so
we like to just that. Yeah, we don't name them. We just collectively think about
that's
them
right.
while other people speculate.
That's right.
Well, one other thing too is in that same article, I thought this was kind of interesting. It's in the LinkedIn article. Small to mid-level companies are those most likely to have an employee steal from them, accounting for 69% of all embezzlement cases. Because again, it's easier to have that inner circle that you can just ward off. And basically, like you said, anytime she got a questionable charge, no, it's good. I'm the CEO. I say it's good.
Yeah, approved.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't like big embezzlement, but when I was a teenager, I worked at a grocery store, and I had a friend up at the service desk, and all of a sudden one day she was gone. And turns out she was gone for a long time because she was cashing bad checks the entire time. And just, it was like a small family-owned grocery store. You're not going to get away with that she got away with this for what, 6 years, you said?
Yeah.
Man. I also liked the quotes from the president, and this was his quote. His quote was, "We are gratified that justice is being done." Stop. Full stop. She also did a great job of wiping everything off the internet. There were all these different family accounts and nothing on social media. The only thing was that there's the old Opulence by Steele Instagram is still out there. And while she did a good job of cleaning everything else out, there was one post that just said, "It costs $0 to be a good human being."
Cognitive dissonance.
Not wrong, but yeah.
Oh, goodness. Come on, Donna.
Be better.
Right? Yeah, be better. Costs less than that to be it. Anyway. Well, let's move on to In Case You Missed It. Some of the stories that maybe weren't as popular on the site, but still stand to make a big impact on the industry going forward. Andy, let's start with you this week. What was your In Case You Missed It?
So mine, if I have to track down the headline here because I forgot to put that on my other note sheet. Man charged in $82 million hacking insider trading scheme. So we talk a lot about cybersecurity here and the potential costs of not keeping your data secure. So, and this is not this is not an amateur hack that happened here. So what happened was prosecutors alleged that 5 Russian nationals hacked into U.S. networks to steal financial data before it was disclosed to the public. So earnings reports, basically, before they became public knowledge. They used that information to trade stocks, and they made more than $80 million between 2018 and 2020. So the companies affected were, or listed here in the report, were Tesla, Snap, Roku, Nielsen, Kohl's, and others. So that's another maybe more concrete example of what people can do with your information if they get a hold of it. And it's also a lesson to any Russian hackers who may be listening in. Watch where you travel, because there were 5 people here. This individual's name is Vladislav Kluskin.
Nailed it.
Killed it.
Just say it once, because then everybody thinks you're right.
That's right. He went to Switzerland this spring for reasons, and now he faces decades in U.S. prison, and his 4 colleagues are still out and about.
So was it the Swiss authorities that caught him?
He was arrested in Switzerland, extradited in December this month.
Man.
And now he's under federal indictment.
He went for reasons.
For reasons.
I'm here in Switzerland for reasons.
Yeah.
They are my own.
I mean, I hear it's lovely. Just maybe when you're trafficking in Tesla insider trading secrets, maybe just watch yourself a little bit.
Jeff, you've been covering a lot in cybersecurity with the security breach series that you're working on. What were your thoughts on this hacking story?
Yeah, it's incredible. And, we just had a really interesting guy on the last episode. We'll be looking to put that out shortly. And one of the things that he talked about is just the advancements that are being made also on the white hat side of things. Okay. We know the black hats are out there doing their thing and creating all sorts of carnage, leveraging technology for insider trading and lots of other nefarious things. But at the same time, the good guys are getting smarter too. And they're getting a feel for what these guys are looking at, what they're going for, what the most vulnerable targets are, and getting smarter and finding them, tracking them down, and bringing them to justice. So
I'm guessing these kind of trading patterns weren't all that discreet, maybe not all that difficult for the SEC to track down.
Especially when you're looking at those blue chips like that. It'd be different if these were smaller stocks or less, weren't in the news all the time, but everybody knows what's going on with Tesla and some of those other folks.
Well, it's also 82 million, and you said 2 years, less than 2 years?
Less than 3 for sure. Is 2018 to 2020.
Okay.
Slow it down a little bit.
Right? More of a trickle next time, guys.
I mean, you can live pretty comfortably on $500,000 a year, and they may not as be aware.
Yeah, just smaller fraud. Don't go to Switzerland.
And again, these guys were had ties to Russian intelligence and that sort of thing. So not your mom and pop hacking operation.
No, that's Jeff. Do you want a conspiracy theory on that one? I know you got a couple.
Oh man, don't get me started. We'll be here a while.
All right. We will save, Russian meddling for another day. All right. For mine, in case you missed it this week, I chose the first 3D printed owner-occupied home in the U.S. So Zach Mannheimer founded Alquist 3D in 2020 to solve the rural housing crisis with new 3D printing technology. Last week, the company, in partnership with Habitat for Humanity, unveiled the first 3D printed owner-occupied home in the nation. April Stringfield and her son are the new owners of a 1,300 square foot 3D printed home with 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. Now, I found it to be a very interesting story because they really overcame a lot. Like there were stigma problems. When you have robots building homes, people are afraid. It's new technology and they don't get it. That's kind of why they chose the bungalow style home that they had. They came in to supply chain problems. They couldn't get the 3D printer because of COVID-19 and because that ship got stuck in the Suez Canal. They had technology problems because it turns out not all concrete is created equal. When you're printing it in Virginia, it's not going to react the same. And they had other hiccups along the way. They had cost problems. They had material problems in terms of the concrete getting too hot and becoming brittle. Now, all of that aside, they still created 2 prototype homes, a 3rd home that now has a family in it. And while we've covered a lot of 3D printed homes before, this is the first one that's actually making a real impact on society. And I think that's really cool. It's also interesting to see this groundswell around 3D printed homes. And, typically, especially in case you missed it, I use that as my forward-looking, crazy, futuristic UFO. Whereas, this was something that we talked about 3D printed homes for the last few years. And it's actually here. It's realized. And, there's a tremendous opportunity in it.
It is. It's really interesting. It's a smaller home, 1,300 square feet.
Yeah,
so I think it's a good test case to see what happens here, because I'll be honest, as much of an advocate as I am for 3D printing and all the potential applications, we talked about military stuff last time, medical, obviously, a huge number of opportunities there. I need to see this work, before I'm going to trust that it can handle weather and bugs and all those other things that you count on a home to safeguard you from.
Yeah.
So it's good that we can get a legit test case out there and see if this makes sense going forward.
Yeah. He also works with this Atlas Community Studios, which works to revitalize small communities. And he's been working with small towns that average about 3,000 people and building new streets, creating new businesses, and helping current businesses in the region expand. Now, Andy, one thing that I found interesting, and we talk about it all the time, but he sort of just reinforced it for me. Working in these small communities, the top 3 complaints that he hears all the time in every community: a lack of childcare, poor access to broadband, and limited or no housing options.
That's what we've, every time we talk about 3D printed houses, it's always, now this house and the houses that they're building, they're still about the equivalent of building just brick and mortar the same way you would every other house. But the idea is, once you get better at it, once it scales, you can bring those costs down and you can try to tackle the housing crisis that affects small towns, big cities, everywhere, because real estate prices have gone so wacko over the past few decades here.
Right. So this house was, these homes right now, he said, are valued between like $220,000, $270,000. But when we've worked on it before with Icon Labs, they talk about building an entire community where at scale, the homes cost about $4,000.
So does this change or replace the current construction, the current home builder, the labor that's involved?
It changes it because there's less materials wasted, and it's actually a more efficient home. But I mean, you mean in terms of like the crew that's there to build it?
Right.
I think a lot of that is all still there. It just changes the process. I mean, and maybe it's kind of like when automation goes into the plant, right?
Right.
Whereas it's not that you're losing your job to automation, it's that it's changing. I mean, when you see a giant 3D printer sitting on, it's going to take some guys to get that calibrated and working and monitor it, as it prints. So I don't see it. I do see it being could potentially huge disruption that way, but not displacing jobs.
Yeah, I mean, you still need plumbing, heating,
Oh, yeah.
electrical, all that kind of stuff. It doesn't change. Just maybe some of the framing, things like that are definitely going to be different.
Framing's going to be different. But when you look at the home, you can see how it's stratified. You can see the 3D printed layers. But other than that, it looks like a normal home.
Yeah, and they did that on purpose. It's a nice little bungalow. Wouldn't look out of place in pretty much any neighborhood.
Yeah, you're gonna look at it just because like the 2 weeks prior to that had like a monster machine, like pouring concrete through a nozzle. Just everyone, nothing to see here.
Let's go check the walls once
just
in a
the
while.
opposite, right? You want them to see that. You want them to see it's effective, it works, it's not as daunting or complex as you might think. I mean, it's building.
Well, and the other thing is talking about materials problems is that right now he's printing with concrete, but he's working with 2 different companies. It's Revive Hemp Industries, and I think it's Black Bear 3D on a completely new hempcrete 3D printing technology that could be really cool because one of his biggest things is, we're trying 3D print homes for good, but concrete puts a lot of CO2 out in the atmosphere.
Okay.
So they're going to try building a 3D printer to print hempcrete. And I think that's just cool. We see a lot of these, again, altruistic things where I'm talking about flying cars with bird legs. And it's just.
And now you're talking about hempcrete.
And now it's hempcrete. But, hempcrete's, hey, man, I'm telling you, hempcrete's going to be a thing.
All right.
It's going to be a thing.
All right.
Jeff, what's your, in case you missed it this week?
Well, we made it so far without talking about one of that one guy's companies. But I like this one because we're recording here in the midst of the holiday season. I just thought this was a cool story. So we're talking about SpaceX launching Christmas presents to the space station. Now, in addition to the 6,500-pound payload that included presents from these 7 astronauts' families, as well as food for a nice Christmas feast, this was also, and this, you have to take a minute and just appreciate this. This was the company's 100th successful rocket landing. This was the 100th time SpaceX has shot a rocket up to space and had that rocket return successfully to a platform to be reused.
Yeah.
And just a couple days before this, they had reused a booster for the 11th time. That's incredible. That is an incredible advancement in terms of what this is potentially offering from us from a technological perspective, understanding space, revolutionizing aerospace travel. This is a huge breakthrough. And I think this is sometimes we get caught up in some of the other headlines surrounding SpaceX and its owner.
Yeah.
Just taking a minute to appreciate what it was able to do here is pretty amazing. So in addition to getting those folks a good Christmas dinner and some presents from their family, it also included kind of an interesting laundry detergent experiment.
Okay.
So station astronauts currently, they trash their dirty clothes. They're done. When they're done wearing them, Procter & Gamble is developing a fully degradable detergent for eventual use at the station, on the moon, and beyond. So ideally, this detergent will take care of everything on it. Just basically put it in there and it'll work like regular detergent. Yeah. So very interesting there too. But again, I was caught up in the fact that that we are at this point now with SpaceX and what it's capable of doing. That was pretty interesting.
Watching when SpaceX lands one of those rockets is amazing. I mean, whether it's the 100th time or the first time they did it or the many times they failed at it, it's incredible. Yeah. It's incredible. So it's, I don't know, it's good to hear that a week or two after we're talking about him. This week he's bringing Christmas presents to the International Space Station. For Thanksgiving, he was like, everyone get back here, we're going bankrupt.
Well, it's cool too. This was their 31st launch of the year, successful launch this year. That's the most they've ever done. It also happened 6 years to the date from the first launch.
Oh, right.
So
nice.
Just a lot of real neat things. Again, getting away from Elon and just focusing on this company because it's more than just him.
Oh, yeah.
And what they've been able to accomplish is incredible. It's one of those things like in our lifetime, we'll be able to say, this wasn't here, and now look at what it is.
So it's been 106 years? 106. It's been a 6-year time frame since, that's incredible.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so they got Santa came early. He delivers to space first on the route.
That's all right. Get that out of the way.
All right. Let's move on to our final thoughts this week. Andy, I'll start with you. What are your final thoughts?
I try to, every time I do this, I've been fortunate enough to do this a few weeks now. I try to, you guys always come up with a book or a movie or whatever recommendation. I happened to stay up way too late a couple weeks ago watching a PBS documentary about William Randolph Hearst, which I believe it was American Experience. It's one of those episodes, it was particularly the yellow journalism era, the late 19th century. And that's one of those things that you read about when you're a kid in history class and maybe kind of gloss over because you're in a rush to get to World War I or whatever. Mm-hmm. But working in media now, it was interesting to go back and look at that. So if anyone, I'm the last millennial with cable, so that's where I watched it, but I think you can probably find it on the internet somewhere. If anyone is interested in journalism history and is a big dork like I am.
As a tidbit about like what you were seeing about yellow journalism, what was it that you sort of found particularly relevant about what's going on now?
I don't know about what's going on right now. I mean, there are circumstances of society that kind of the trusts going on and the incredible wealth versus the maybe people who don't have as much wealth. That's maybe could mirror some things going on now. But it was just stuff as simple as he basically bought a not very successful paper, cut its price to half of what Pulitzer's industry leader was selling for, and just ate losses until he was the biggest paper in the world, and then was this enormous media tycoon. So if you come from means, you can just eat losses forever until you make it. So that's a fun lesson too.
Very good. Very good. All right. My final thought this week was I had an update on a story. So last week we talked about the poor planning leading to a deadly Texas pipeline blast. And that had me reference the natural gas blaze that was blamed on operator error, in February of 2019. Well, I had a chance to talk to somebody that is in the trades. And, I guess I talk a little bit too optimistically about how accurate plans are. He's just like, I completely understand that. Plans are garbage. He's like, yeah, you have the drawing initially, but every once in a while you have a contractor that, you know, you're supposed to like go across the front of the home and then down the side, and they just decide to go towards the back and then over. And he's just like, it's completely lawless and not that regulated. So maybe I should have given a little bit more benefit of the doubt to the operator, because, and then also there are these existing plans, but then there are things that are no longer operational that are just, you like dig and hit something and you give it a minute before you're like, are we dead? So it was, you know, it's a lot more dangerous and kind of unknown than maybe I gave it credit. And so just wanted to thank Pete for setting me straight on that.
That's comforting.
Perspective's always good.
Yeah.
Let's not to think too much about that one, right?
No.
Yeah. What's under my house?
Bowling balls.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. The foundation's made of bowling balls. There's a story to look up. Also, by the time most of you hear this, it's going to be after the holiday. But for the few of those that are going to listen to this before the holiday, and actually whoever, stay sane. Do your best to stay sane and be kind to your friends and families and strangers. You know, it's not just the time. It's not just because of the season, but, you know, I think that's going to do us all a little good if everyone's just a little bit kinder to one another. Now, Jeff, your final thought.
Final thought. Congratulations to our first trivia winner.
Oh,
got that T-shirt out. We did get some other responses in. Now, they weren't wrong. They just weren't the right answer. Okay, and let's remember we are using 35-year-old trivia cards here for safety. Yep. So just to review, the question from last week is, what is the most expensive common injury in the United States? And we were looking for back injuries. So we did have some correct responses, and we got those T-shirts out.
That was Larry?
That was Larry.
Congratulations,
Good
Larry.
work, man. We did have some other folks come in talking about strains and all, strains, falls, all that stuff. This is the one we were looking for. So good work. And for those who were hoping there'd be another opportunity for that T-shirt, here we go. Here is your trivia question. Email any of us email the podcast in the subject line with your response to when do most stairway falls occur? Is it A, walking up the stairs, B, walking down the stairs, or C, sliding down the banister, getting after them Christmas presents under the tree, and you just can't wait.
I know which one I really hope it is.
So again, you guys don't answer.
Yeah.
A, B, or C. A, walking up the stairs. B, walking down the stairs. Or C, sliding down the banister. When do most stairway falls occur? Up, down, or down the banister? Let me know.
Right. It depends on whether or not this takes place in like a cool 80s movie, like with kids. Just like all the cool kids take the banister down in the shop. Are there banisters in shops?
God, well, no, not banisters.
Yeah.
That'd be kind of awkward.
Yeah. Oh, right on. Well,
what are you going to slide down otherwise? Come on.
Good fireman's pole.
Oh, Andy. Come on.
No,
I would echo your thoughts about staying sane.
Yeah.
It is always good tip.
Yeah. Stay sane. You know, the sugar and the coffee definitely don't always help. No. But after you're too high, you know, just make sure the alcohol brings it down a little bit. Got to get even. All right. So please make sure to send your answers to the trivia question to jeff@in.com or any of us. And before we get out of here, you know, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. To email the podcast, like I said, you can reach Jeff, Andy, or I at IEN.com. You could also reach Anna at IEN.com and let her know how much you miss her. Anna, I hope everyone gets well soon. We'll see you in 2022. Finally, if you want to make sure that you get the podcast to your inbox first, make sure to subscribe to our daily and weekly newsletters. All right, for Jeff and Andy, I'm David Manti. This is the Today in Manufacturing podcast. We'll see you next week. See you next year.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Today in Manufacturing podcast.